Hi, this is Bill Ringle, host of the audio magazine My Quest for the Best, where we meet business, thought, and community leaders to discuss issues relevant to entrepreneurial growth. Joining us today is Mark Sanborn. Mark Sanborn is a CSP CPAE and is president of Sanborn Associates, an idea studio dedicated to developing leaders in business and in life. Mark's an international best-selling author and noted authority on leadership, team building, customer service, and change. He holds the CSP, or Certified Speaking Professional designation from the National Speakers Association, and is a member of the Speaker Hall of Fame and recently served as president of NSA. He was recently honored with a Cavett Award, the highest honor the NSA bestows on its members, in recognition of his outstanding contributions to the speaking profession. Mark's also a member of the exclusive Speakers Roundtable, made up of 20 of the top speakers in America. As an author, Mark has written 7 books, including Team Built, Making Teamwork Work, Sanborn on Success, and the international bestseller, The Fred Factor, How Passion in Your Work and Life Can Make the Ordinary Extraordinary. His most recent release, You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader, is making an impact on leadership development at every level. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be with you and with your listeners as well.
Mark, how did you get started as a speaker and an author?
It's interesting to me that today, as someone who speaks about leadership and customer service and who's been an entrepreneur for the better part of his adult life, that the early origins of that career path began with public speaking. When I was 10 years old, I was in a youth organization called 4-H, and my local club needed a representative for the speaking competition. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, hopefully not more than you want, I was not a particularly athletic kid. I did well in school, kind of a geek or a nerd before either of those two words were popular. And I thought that speaking was something I could do because it just meant that I had to think better than my competition. And boy, was I in for a shock, because in that first competition, I did so badly that I can remember these many years later just, how humiliated I felt. And the reason that that's important is because it got me started down a path of learning how to speak well. And through speaking, I started to understand the process of mastery. Now, a lot of your listeners will have had similar experiences but different specifics. For instance, many young people get involved in athletics, and that becomes their metaphor for mastery that they apply to other areas of their lives. Or perhaps it's music, or maybe it's debate. Well, for me, it was public speaking. And because of my interest in public speaking, I got very involved in youth organization leadership. And those two things combined together to create a great interest that I have to this day in how leaders communicate, how leaders influence others, how they create great organizations that deliver extraordinary service. And so from those humble beginnings, punctuated by some years in sales and marketing in the publishing industry, I've come to be the president of my own firm for the past 24 years, where we work with leaders at every level, showing them through my speaking and my books and my advising how to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary.
Mark, as you think of the people who are wanting to become better leaders, how do they take it upon themselves to raise themselves up to the next level of leadership mastery, as you describe?
I think you point out something important that sometimes we overlook, and that is for anyone to get better at anything begins with desire. You might say awareness, but we're often aware that we could be better at an area of our lives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're motivated to become better. So I think the operative key here is that those people who want to improve have taken the first and most important step in the process, because they now have to find out how to channel that desire into action. And there's not a better time to be alive if you want to learn how to lead than now, for two reasons. One is there are more opportunities than ever. As problems in our culture and our world and our organizations have become more complex, we need more leadership, whether or not those leaders have titles or those leaders are people without titles that simply want to be a positive influence. But the second reason that it's a great time to want to be a better leader is because there are so many resources. It wasn't that long ago that I can recall going into a public library and using, the card system to locate books on leadership that I wanted to read or study. And today, with the access that the Internet's given us, you can quickly find out what resources exist, whether that would be books or seminars, coursework at the university level, or any number of programs. I think probably today the biggest challenge is not accessing all of the resources that will make you a better leader, but assessing, if you will, or evaluating which ones are really good, because the downside to having so many great resources about so much is that there's a lot of pablum out there. There are some courses, some books, some ideas that aren't as good as others, and so the real challenge is to find those resources that will best help you with your particular needs and desires become better at leading.
And Mark, what do you think leaders are struggling with the most today? As you work with your leaders, the types of people who are reaching out and asking you for advice and input, what is it that runs common between leaders who are looking for advice today?
Today, leaders struggle with uncertainty. There's always been uncertainty in the world. I've heard some of my colleagues say that, we've always had change and that change is nothing new, and I agree only in part with that idea because I think change itself has changed. I think it's more complex. I think it's happening at a greater speed. I think that there are challenges in dealing with change that we didn't have certainly 5 years ago, much less 50 years ago. So I think the very nature of change is that uncertainty has become so unpredictable that it's hard for us to know day to day, week to week, month to month what we should be doing. And one of the things that I've tried to do in my work is focus less on trying to predict the future, less on being a futurist, and more on being a presentologist. A presentologist isn't somebody that predicts the future. There's somebody that's pretty sure, based on what's going on and what they can foresee in the future, they're sure about what needs to be done now. And that's one of the great skills of a leader, whether it's in a small business or a large Fortune 100 company, is leaders not only have to be focused on doing the right things, but they need to create shared focus. In other words, they need to identify what should we be doing now to hedge our bets, assure our success, mitigate the downturns, if you will, and then they need to make sure that those things are being done. That's where the shared focus comes in. And I find that very often leaders are pretty good at being focused, but less good at creating shared focus.
And if someone finds themselves listening to this and saying, yes, I resonate with that, what would be one or two steps that they could take to expand their expertise in this area so that they can become good at shared focus?
Well, Bill, I think you know Scott Ginsberg or know of Scott and his work. He's a colleague of ours in the National Speakers Association. Scott once asked me one of the best questions I've ever been asked by any audience member. He said, Mark, what are the 3 or 4 things you do every day to assure your ongoing success? And I think that's the question that leaders have to answer. And they can answer it both at a personal level, but more importantly at an organizational level. There are probably 187 different things we all do every day. I mean, our lives are varied. But the reality is there are a very few, that really create the majority of our results and our success. Those are the 3 or 4 things that Scott was alluding to. And I think that the answer to that question, what are the 3 or 4 things? And by the way, 3 or 4 is not a magic number. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 2. But the point is, it's not a double-digit number. But when you know what those important things are, then you start doing them, and you start in your work coaching and advising and giving performance reviews and managing others to help them answer that question within the context of your organization. For instance, if, business development, which I think for most entrepreneurs should be right at the top of their things you do every day list, if business development is key, you need to make sure that everybody from the person that answers the phone to your salespeople to the people in the warehouse know what business development looks like from their job perspective. It means that a person who might answer the phone, a receptionist, would be alert to a potential problem that needs to be solved and that might not get on radar, or an opportunity that might be lost on a salesperson who didn't take the phone call. In other words, if business development is on that short list of things we should do every day to assure our success, that means that everybody needs to know, even if their job isn't specifically business development, how their job impacts or aids that.
So what you're suggesting is to create a structure to help provide some direction during times of uncertainty. And that structure is having these set number of small things, but very high important things to be asking yourself and to be practicing on a regular basis for every member of your team.
Well, it's about implementing focus, and what I suggest is that you work with each of the people that you lead. Begin with yourself, but work with the people you lead to identify their MVP activities. Now, we know in sports MVP stands for most valuable player, but in this sense, it stands for most valuable and profitable activities. And that simply means that you look at all the things you do every day through that lens of focus, and you say, what are those key things, those most valuable and profitable activities that will give us the biggest payback on our investment of time and energy and expertise? And that's where people come up with a structure that will support this focus, the philosophy of focus. It becomes structured in that I know that there are other things I'm going to need to do, but that I should be spending probably 60 to 80% of every day on my MVP activities. And, Bill, it's important to realize that still gives you 20 to 40% of the day to deal with the unexpected and the urgent and the interruptions that inevitably occur. But if you could spend 60 to 80% of every day on your most valuable and profitable activities, you would, A, be almost laser-like in your focus, but more importantly, you would increase dramatically the results that you enjoy.
And I bet there's a piece to that where they need to reflect at the end of the day how successful they were with staying on task with those priorities.
Well, yes, they need to reflect. We all need to reflect on two or three things. First, we need to reflect on how successful we were, not to beat up on ourselves, but so that we can become more focused tomorrow and next week and next month. But I think also, number two, we should reflect on the difference between activity and accomplishment. I notice a lot of leaders that almost wear as a badge of honor how busy they are. But really, life isn't about how busy you are. Life's about the results you create. And ironically, there are times when we can accomplish more by doing less, by editing out the unimportant or the trivial or the insignificant. But I think the third area of reflection should be on what did you learn today? I'm not a golfer, but I have friends who are, and I know that you can hit a bucket of 100 golf balls and not improve your swing one iota unless you're paying attention to each swing. It's the feedback, it's the insight that makes you a better golfer, not just blindly hitting golf balls. And I think a lot of leaders go through the motions every day. They're busy. That's the activity part. And maybe they are accomplishing results, but they aren't looking for the insights that will help them make those activities more efficient or more effective and that will improve the results they enjoy.
Well, Mark, you've accomplished a lot as both a consultant, a speaker, and author. One of the things that I find remarkable is the success you've had as an author. Can you look back and share with us a few insights you gained in your writing?
I've always wanted to write big books, the tomes, the 400-page books, rich with data. And, I've always admired Jim Collins, who I think is a great writer, but who bases his writing on deep research. But what I realized is my brand was going to take an entirely different direction. I did write some long books, some big books, if you will, but the books I'm most well known for are shorter books that are anywhere from 120 to 180 pages, about 24 to 30,000 words. And what I found is that many people buy big books, but few people read them. My brand is little books about big ideas. And so each of the books I write, what I try to do is not to oversimplify, but to reduce, if you will, to kind of the key points, what it takes to be successful in each of the topic areas that I focus on. You mentioned in my introduction my book, The Fred Factor, which I've been gratified has sold over 2 million copies internationally and here in the U.S. And that's a book that's driven by a story about a true postal carrier. And from that story, I have isolated 4 principles for providing extraordinary service or for turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. My book, You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader, asks the question, how can we create leadership at every level in our organization? And the book, to give you the Reader's Digest version, basically answers 2 questions. Number 1, when is it appropriate for anyone to lead? And then number 2, how do they do it? I wrote a book called The Encore Effect because I've always been fascinated with remarkable performers, whether that be in sales or in management, on the athletic field, in music. So I wrote a book about the steps to achieving remarkable performance that anyone could use. And then finally, my most recent book that just came out is called Up, Down, or Sideways, How to Succeed When Times Are Good, Bad, or In Between. And it's really an extension of that question we've been talking about, which is, what are the 3 or 4 things that you could and should do every day to assure your ongoing success? In other words, it's a book about change that focuses on what should never change, the things we should always be doing regardless of the changes that happen around us. And what I found is that if I was going to kind of look for the big lesson as an author, people really are less interested in what you and I have done or even what we've learned. What they ultimately want to know is what they can learn from what we've learned. And I'm always reticent to write about myself in my books, except as a means to share with people lessons that are proven by experience, that they aren't some kind of abstract academic conjecture. But then to take it a step further and say, here's what you can learn from my experience or the experience of someone else that I'm writing about.
Mark, you've shared with us so many great ideas today on My Quest for the Best. I want to thank you so much for joining us and lending us how to focus on 3 or 4 ideas and how that can lead to success, what to reflect on each day in order to gain insight into your activities and progress and the results that you've created, and your perspective on success as an author and the books that you've written and how that's led to your understanding of how to share ideas in big ways in that people really understand and get. You've reminded us that the things that matter most often change the least. Mark Sanborn, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.